Labdien, godātie TVNet lasītāji, skatītāji un klausītāji! Mani sauc Toms Rātvelders, esmu TVNet žurnālists, kā arī politologs, un šodien mums Skype intervijā ir pievienojies Topčubāšova centra Azerbaidžānā direktors un līdzdibinātājs Rusivs Hoseinovs. So, hello Rusiv, thank you very much Rusiv for joining us today. So, how are you?
Hi Toms, sveiki. My pleasure to be with you today.
Great, our pleasure as well. So, could you describe the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic in Azerbaijan? Have the measures taken by the government been successful to contain the spread of the virus?
Yes, as of May 10th, we've had 2,519 cases of infection with 32 deaths. According to official statistics, nearly 200,000 tests have been carried out so far. The first infection case in Azerbaijan was reported on February 28th, but an operational headquarters under the Cabinet of Ministers was created a day earlier to prevent the spread of the virus, because by that time, Azerbaijan's southern neighbor, Iran, had turned into a regional epicenter of the COVID-19. Logically, soon the movement between the two countries was halted. All educational processes were aborted in early March, while Azerbaijan's borders with other countries, including the neighboring ones, had been shut by mid-March. On March 31st, the government declared nationwide quarantine. People were required to stay home, or more exactly, where they were at that time. In early April, Azerbaijan introduced a novel methodology for keeping people at home. I'm not sure whether any other country put into use a similar method. Ordinary citizens had to obtain SMS permission to leave the place of residence. In other words, one had to notify authorities by a text message indicating the reason why they wanted to go outside and ID number. People without such permit would be fined. On May 4th, the strict regime was partially relaxed, with many businesses allowed to reopen and resume their operation. Except for four biggest cities, other towns and provinces were released from lockdown and are now trying to normalize their life. The largest cities, including the capital Baku, which is home to at least 2 million people, will still have to live under the quarantine with this SMS permission system, at least until the end of May.
Rusiv, just to interrupt for a bit. So, are those SMS permissions given freely, or are they more rarely? Do you have to have like a really good reason to leave the home to get permission?
Yes, there are certain reasons, and each reason has a relevant code. It could be medical treatment, grocery shopping, or the death of a close relative. If you send a relevant code accompanied with your ID number to the authorities, then you may receive a 2 or 3 hour permission to go and to do your whatever you want to do. Well, this quarantine system, as I already mentioned, will be effective at least until the end of May, but we have to be careful and must still keep our borders closed, because 3 of our neighboring countries, namely Russia, Iran, and Turkey, are included in top 10 in the COVID-19 statistics.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned about Azerbaijan, but what about situation in Georgia and Armenia? Is it similar there, or the situation is more severe?
A similar situation with government's relevant restrictive measures is observed elsewhere in the world, including the Caucasus. Georgia and Armenia declared state of emergency, unlike Azerbaijan, which stopped short of it by imposing nationwide quarantine. in Georgia, this policy has been accompanied with a nightly curfew and some temporary radical measures, including banning private vehicles for a brief period of time. At the same time, this period witnessed some controversy in Georgia as the Orthodox Church decided to continue its services, including sharing communion spoons, celebrating Easter in mid-April amid pandemic and despite anti-virus policy of the authorities, which created serious concern and public discussions. Meanwhile, in Armenia, Armenia has the most infection cases in South Caucasus, over 3,000. There have been dozens of infection cases in the Armenian army. This is why the defense minister decided some time ago not to disclose virus-related data anymore. A month ago, in early April, Russia also sent military specialists and medical equipment to our ally, Armenia, where they set up a mobile laboratory. Mm-hmm. Well, it seems the situation in Armenia is more alarming. According to health authorities, if the current dynamics continues, the number of the COVID-19 infected in Armenia may double every 15 days and even surpass 10,000 by June.
So are there any mistakes made by the Armenian government which might explain this phenomenon?
I try to follow Armenian press. Usually the society is accusing the government of ineffective policies. I don't know, to be honest. I'm not sure how the situation got out of control, but they say the coronavirus outbreak happened after some religious ceremonies, because the infected person attended some religious ceremony, I don't know, maybe in early March or late February, and then she also attended some other gatherings. This could explain the reason of the outbreak, but the government's policies, to be honest, it would be hard for me to explain and evaluate at the moment.
Okay, so do you have police patrolling the streets in all the three Caucasus states, right? You have to.
Yes, definitely. Police patrolling the streets, checking citizens, their permits, their reasons why they go outside. At the same time, at least as far as I know, in Azerbaijan and Georgia, I'm not so sure about Armenia, there are also checkpoints in the entrance and exits of provinces and towns.
Mm-hmm. So you said that in Armenia and Georgia they have a curfew, but not in Azerbaijan. So what's the difference then if you have police patrolling the streets in all three Caucasus states?
Well, the situation is more or less similar. You can call it quarantine or state of emergency, but the regime is quite strict. Maybe you have to also consider this southern mentality, the Caucasian mentality, where people like gatherings, where people do not usually observe social distancing. Therefore, some strict measures, fines and penalties, sometimes even arrests for a few days, must happen. For instance, a couple of days ago, the Baku underground system was reopened, but the main precondition was to for passengers was to wearing masks. I read news yesterday that one person who did not wear masks while being in the subway was arrested by the police.
I see. So if we move on to the economy of Azerbaijan, I guess the lockdown mechanisms currently imposed has a great toll on your economy. So what is the situation? How big of the loss are we talking about here?
Azerbaijan, just like many other countries, has been hit by the economic problems, both internal and external, stemming from the Covid-19. With an economy that relies on oil export, Azerbaijan had to face drastic fall of oil prices in the past 2-3 months. With many industries halted and the demand of the biggest oil importers such as China lowered, oil prices flipped downward starting from February. The 2020 national budget of Azerbaijan had set the oil price at $55 per barrel, 55. The Brent oil is nowadays being sold for less than $30 in international markets. So this gap is certainly creating a big deficit in the budget. Nevertheless, the government seems firm and confident, probably relying on huge reserves accumulated in the oil fund for the past several years. Financially, for instance, the country's central bank allocates huge resources to keep the rate of the local currency stable, whereas the neighboring countries, Turkey and Georgia, had the values of their respective currencies depreciated. According to the estimates of the Economy Ministry, Azerbaijan loses up to $90 million per day because of the coronavirus, which has brought a lot of domestic problems, seized businesses, an army of the unemployed people. Therefore, the government approved several national support programs with a total budget of 2.5 billion manat, or nearly 1.5 billion US dollars. They are designed to provide benefits to businesses, especially SMEs, and social assistance to the unemployed during the pandemic. According to the programs, the state assumes part of the salaries of over 300,000 workers. More than 300,000 micro and individual entrepreneurs are also going to benefit from state support. In addition, the state will cover tuition costs, 40 million manat, for students who are members of socially vulnerable groups.
Rusev, just a second. So you are already talking about the government. So do you see that COVID-19 could cause any changes in the domestic landscape of Azerbaijan? What could be the implications of the political positions of your president, for example, Ilham Aliyev?
Well, in general, I believe the role of government has strengthened in many countries during the pandemic. And it will also influence the overall political landscape in many countries. Azerbaijan, with its super presidential system, is not an exception. What has been a characteristic feature of the domestic politics nowadays is the mass arrests of middle and high-ranking officials across the country. Although this process was launched earlier this year, it has intensified in the past few weeks. Several governors, officials both in central and regional governments, have been detained by security services. The detained are accused of corruption, bribery, and embezzlement of state money, especially in financial aid allocated for those in need. This could be part of an infighting within the ruling elites. But one thing is crystal clear. This situation will further consolidate the power of the incumbent president, Ilham Aliyev, who has repeatedly stated in the past few weeks that the corruption at high levels would no more be tolerated. Replacing the so-called old guard with Soviet mentality, with younger and Western-educated technocrats is taking place in the country at the moment, and I think it will definitely change the socio-political landscape of the country and produce big shifts hopefully more positive, hopefully more visible in post-pandemic period.
You were mentioning some sort of changes in Azerbaijan. Could you maybe elaborate a bit? What could be those changes politically after the pandemic?
What the society is complaining about more is the existence of the so-called older officials in many ministries, many state organs, both central and regional. They usually have this Soviet mentality. They are seen as the main obstacle for the country's development. Therefore, the main change would be related to substitution of these senior officials with young, Western-educated people who possess broader vision, who know the world much better, who understand which way Azerbaijan should go. Mm-hmm. So I believe this would be the main trend in Azerbaijan in the next few months.
Do you believe that it will bring some changes to this conflict? The pandemic will bring some changes to this conflict.
Okay. Well, the occupation of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is an integral and international part of Azerbaijan, has been continuing for the past 28 years. Of course, as Azerbaijan, we would want to extend our hand to Azerbaijani citizens in Nagorno-Karabakh through such turbulent times. Because thousands of local residents are especially in need of normal statehood that would provide healthcare and economic assistance to fight the COVID-19 and its effects. Nevertheless, it is now impossible due to a separatist regime in the region installed by the Republic of Armenia. The regime organized presidential and parliamentary elections amid the pandemic by putting at risk the lives of thousands. The so-called presidential elections even proceeded in two rounds, March 31st and April 14th. Can you imagine? They decided to go even for a second round despite the recommendations not to do so. Perhaps the separatist party tried to legitimize its regime by holding these elections, but they were condemned not only by Azerbaijan, but by a number of countries and international organizations as well, because these moves provide no contribution to the conflict settlement. Vice versa, they worsen the situation and deepen the distrust between the conflicting parties. Mm. And despite the pandemic is not reasonable, softly speaking, as it may speed up the spread of the virus and further risking many lives.
I see. So what about foreign relations of Azerbaijan? For example, regarding your relations with Iran, could there be any changes? Or Russia, for example?
Since the mid-90s, Azerbaijan has been pursuing the so-called balancing policy, which implies positive relations with all regional and international actors. In the mid-noughties, this multi-vector policy has been further polished. The equidistance from all major conflicting political blocs and integrationist projects, both Western and Eastern. So this was set as a cornerstone of Azerbaijan's foreign policy. As part of this framework, Azerbaijan had usually been reluctant to use multilateral formats by preferring bilateral relations with different countries and institutions. Let me just briefly mention what I have observed in the past month before going to the relations with Russia and Iran. Azerbaijan attempted to take the lead in combining international efforts against the coronavirus when initiating 2 summits in multilateral format. The first one, a video conference of Turkic leaders, which took place on April 6 and was joined by even Hungarian Prime Minister and World Health Organization Director General. A similar summit of the non-aligned movement was held very recently, May 4th, again at the initiative of Azerbaijani president. In other words, Azerbaijan hosted online summits of 2 organizations, Turkey Council and non-aligned movement, not Eastern Partnership or Commonwealth of Independent States. This move once again signals and emphasizes that the country will further try to avoid integrations projects and not to openly side with either Western or Russian blocs. Iran. Despite all the pressure around Iran, Azerbaijan had never agreed to serve as a country from where Iran could be hit, although some speculations on that usually appear on media. I also heard how Azerbaijan also helped financially and sending some medical supplies to Iran during the pandemic. The authorities in our country realize Iran will always remain as our neighbor. Therefore, angering this huge country with rich history and state traditions would not be a good idea. Therefore, keeping normal relations, and these relations are neither too good nor too bad, keeping at least normal relations, not siding with any coalitions against Iran would remain in effect, in my opinion. The same can be said about Russia. Azerbaijan would not probably go very closer with Western institutions. At the same time, joining any Russian-led integrationist projects is not on our agenda either. So equidistance from all parties will remain as a cornerstone of the foreign policy for some time.
So basically you are just trying to balance between multiple sides.
Exactly.
All right. So what are the main lessons Azerbaijan could learn from the crisis? Are there any?
This is a very good question, Thomas. The wider context of the crisis for Azerbaijan definitely includes the sharp downfall of oil prices. Well, what happened domestically? I mean, the shutdown of businesses, unemployed people. These things happened more or less in all the countries. These were direct effects of the pandemic. But what I would like to emphasize, the oil market, Azerbaijan depends on heavily. The oil market proved, once again, to be very sensitive to many processes. But the major driving force that regulates the oil price is certainly demand. The demand for oil will probably go lower and lower in the coming years. Therefore, we as a country should think of diversifying our economy, which is too much based and dependent on our oil exports. In fact, the government ought to prioritize this matter if we want to build a strong economy that wouldn't depend on only one source of income. Therefore, the key lesson, in my understanding, for us should be the diversification of the national economy.
Nu, jebkurā gadījumā es domāju, ka mēs turpināsim sekot līdzi Covid-19 izplatībai pasaulē, notikumiem Azerbaidžānā un arī citām, protams, pasaules valstīm. Savukārt mēs ar jums TVNet lasītāji, skatītāji un klausītāji tiekamies jau citos TVNet formātos. Paldies jums! Visu labu!